Welcome to Mandibil and welcome to part 4 of my deconstruction of Bernardo Kastrup's course series on YouTube about analytic idealism. And this time we are going to head into what he calls constitutive panpsychism, and that might take a little explanation, not before we delve into it, but during and maybe a bit after it. I remember when I heard of panpsychism some years back, the first time I was sort of confused what this was all about. It sounded like a crazy idea, right? It sounded like what the, right? Okay, I mean, it's not completely stupid. I mean, it has its, it has its argument and so on. I can understand the way it's argued, but it's sort of a half-ass attempt at saving materialism, right? Okay, but what I was thinking about was the term analytic idealism. First of all, I wanted to understand whether or not it was analytic or analytical. I guess it's analytic. So, but I haven't actually been able to find other sort of attempts at describing what's it called, independent descriptions that has some oomph to it elsewhere than where Bernardo Kastrup has been involved in it. So I'm having a bit of a hard time figuring out what this is. Is it a particular term that he has created, or taking already established terms and combining it into a new kind of idealism, or is it just a new label on an old on an old bottle of wine, a new label on old wine, right? And what the hell is going on? So it's not too important what you call it, only to the extent that you might be confused when you're using terms that might be misunderstood or used in other connections, which might confuse the understanding what you're actually trying to say. I'm not trying to find any flaws in his use of words. I'm not usually not too hung up on whether or not you use this or that or the other label on it. I'm going for the description itself, right? And whether you call it this or that is less important to me. I'm not saying it's unimportant, because if you're writing some kind of treatise on philosophy, in my opinion, it is very important that you clarify the words, or in the context you're explaining and using terms, it's obvious what those terms mean, and you stick to the terms and you don't misuse them, equivocate them or something else further down the line, so that you are sort of stretching the meaning of the term. Okay, what I could find about this thing was something on Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, a peer-reviewed academic resource. So I guess, we have to trust it, right? Us little peons. But there's something called analytic philosophy, and I've heard about that, and I had the understanding that it's sort of an early 20th century thing, right? And let's see what they write here. It's not about particular analytic idealism, but analytic philosophy in general. And I suppose that's what he's trying to lean up against, right? Analytic philosophy is the school of analytic philosophy. No, the school of analytic philosophy has dominated academic philosophy in various regions, most notably Great Britain and the United States, since the early 20th century. It originated around the turn of the 20th century as G.E. Moore and Bertrand Russell broke away from what was then the dominant school in British universities, absolute idealism. Many would also include Gottlob Frege as a founder of analytic philosophy in the late 19th century, and this controversial issue is discussed in section 2c. When Moore and Russell articulated their alternative to idealism, they used a linguistic idiom, frequently basing their arguments on the meanings of terms and propositions. Additionally, Russell believed that the grammar of natural language often is philosophically misleading. I would absolutely agree. and that the way to dispel the illusion is to re-express proposition in the ideal formal language of symbolic logic, thereby revealing their true logical form. Maybe that's Gottlob Frege and Wittgenstein and these guys. Because of this emphasis on language, analytic philosophy was widely, though perhaps mistakenly, taken to involve a turn toward language as the subject matter of philosophy, and it was taken to involve an accompanying methodological turn toward linguistic analysis. Thus, on the traditional view, analytic philosophy was born in this linguistic turn. The linguistic conception of philosophy was widely seen as novel in the history of philosophy. For this reason, analytic philosophy is reputed to have originated in a philosophical revolution on the grand scale, not merely in a revolt against British idealism, but against traditional philosophy on the whole. Well, yeah. No, but analytic philosophy is like meta, is sort of going meta on philosophy, right? Okay, when we use, or maybe sort of semantic, right? When we use the term whatever, existence, what do we really mean, right? And knowledge and true and all these terms that are usually thrown around as people see fit in both metaphysics and epistemology. And I'm very, I'm a warm, have a soft spot for being very rigid about your use of your terms. At least you can stick to the term and the definition or your understanding of the term, right? But usually people use the term and then they stretch it somehow, right? It is being stretched to encompass more than it originally, or maybe even less, but usually more than it originally was intended to do, or the understanding of it. So if you have a very sort of clear, strict, small definition, it's easier to eat that understanding, and then you can stretch it further down the line, sort of sophist style. And then, because people who read the first part accepted that definition, is being stretched into areas they wouldn't possibly accept. But because they have accepted the term, they're sort of going along with the story, so to say, right? So there's in my opinion, if we cut it short, unless we are talking about concrete propositions about objects, or we are dealing with pure philosophy that is, of course, rigid and semantically strong and all that, we are dealing with sophistry, right? If it's not a proposition about the world, or it's an attempt to understand thinking, which is philosophy, right? Then you're trying to manipulate someone in some way or another. That's my opinion, right? That's my approach to argumentation. Argumentation in the widest sense of the word, right? And I think this sense of being manipulated by words is what grew into becoming what is then here, as they say, known as analytic philosophy. But also there are limitations to our everyday language, which is based on the materialist idea. When we're saying that's a cow, we think of it as that which is outside, right? I'm not referring to a cow in my mind. So as soon as I start to argue, I am implicitly working from the axiom that I'm referring to something outside myself. Otherwise, why the hell would I make the sound or the noise that I call a language or a statement, a proposition? If it was not to communicate that to somebody else, otherwise I'd be a crazy idiot just talking to myself about my own experience, right? So it's implicit in the action that you are working from a particular axiom. So, but because of that, all language has been, in my opinion, or most of it at least, right, has been evolved from trying to describe that outside world. So when you're dealing with philosophy and metaphysics, there are, severe limitations to your use of words, right? And that's in my opinion, that a guy like Immanuel Kant We're trying to, okay, if I invent a new word for that which I cannot access, like noumena, right? Then I'm creating a language for that which doesn't have a language yet. But the problem is, then people are just going to become more confused what you're talking about. I can't, but you can't access this. But then how do you know about it? And why can you call it this? Are you trying to... And these kind of notions frustrated younger generations of philosophers, and I suppose that that's why they are rejecting this kind of what they saw as woo-woo, this metaphysics, and jumped into some kind of analytic philosophy, where they wanted to get down to, well, I have to be sure about my terms used in my philosophy. This might not actually be what Bernardo Kastrup is doing, but on the other hand, analytic philosophy seems to me in this description to be, as it says here, it originated, I can highlight a bit, it originated around the turn of the 20th century. G.E. Moore and Bertrand Russell broke away from what was then dominant school in British universities, absolute idealism. So analytic philosophy is a rejection or a linguistic turn away from idealism, or at least a linguistic turn into trying to understand what the hell the idealists are talking about, maybe, right? So it seems that it's sort of contradictory. It's two terms that work. Judging from this description, I'm no expert in these terms, I mind you, right? But that analytic and idealism is sort of working against each other. But okay, let's let it be with that, and let's head into the part 3, which is my part 4 here, and let's see how it turns out. We are working on constitutive panpsychism. Let's see what he says.
Welcome back to Essential Foundations course on analytic idealism. Today we are going to cover part 3. Last time, in part 2, we've reviewed our mainstream metaphysics, namely mainstream physicalism, the idea that all that exists is inert matter, which is not conscious, neither is it in consciousness, it's something totally outside and independent of consciousness, and mind, experience, somehow arises from that. We've seen that that hypothesis violates coherence, internal logical consistency. It is empirically not adequate. It's certainly not explanatorily powerful, since it creates more problems than it explains. Arguably, it doesn't really explain anything. And finally, it is not conceptually parsimonious, because it makes a postulate about an abstract theoretical entity to which we can never have direct access, namely matter outside and independent of consciousness, since we are cooped up in consciousness, in mentation, which is nature's soul-given. Qualitative experience is nature's soul-given. Everything else is a theoretical abstraction. And in part 2, we've reviewed why that theoretical abstraction isn't helpful at all. On the contrary, it can be reduced to absurdity. So if you haven't seen parts 1 and 2 of this course yet, I recommend you go back and watch them first before watching this part 3, because the course is organized in such a way that each part sort of rests on the previous ones. It assumes that you have seen and watched the previous ones. All right, so let's go for it. Part 3 will be similar to part 2, but instead of critiquing mainstream physicalism, we are going to critique constitutive panpsychism, which is the new fashionable metaphysical hypothesis in the world of analytic philosophy today, and one even espoused by mainstream, well-known neuroscientists like...
When he says it's fashionable, it's sort of a slightly passive-aggressive attack. It's just because it's fashionable. It's sort of, right? When things are fashionable, you're just following whatever, I have to find, that's fashionable, I'm going with that, right? Sort of leading like the Pied Piper or something like that, right? So it's sort of slightly, camouflaged, passive-aggressive attack. I'm sensitive to these things, right?
Christoph Koch, Giulio Tononi, arguably Sam Harris entertains this, although I don't know much about Sam. I just heard that he entertains this hypothesis. I've debated his wife once, and she clearly is pro-panpsychism. So let's dive into this. What is constitutive panpsychism? Well, let me first acknowledge that under the name panpsychism, there are a number of widely different hypotheses put forward. Some versions of panpsychism are very, very close to analytic idealism, which we are going to talk about in the next part. But the one I will be discussing today is the one that is normally called constitutive panpsychism, which is a specific formulation of panpsychism, and it is the most fashionable one. It is the formulation that most people understand to be meant by the word panpsychism, if you don't qualify it. Now, what is it then? The idea is the following. Panpsychists acknowledge that the hard problem of consciousness is not really a problem. It's an internal contradiction of physicalism, and therefore we need an alternative to physicalism. So in that specific sense, panpsychism is a step forward insofar as it lets us see that there is an acknowledgement in large parts, respected parts of academia, that physicalism is not bringing us anywhere. It is simply a contradictory, inadequate hypothesis. Having said that, I don't think panpsychism is any better than physicalism. It tries to address one problem without really solving it, and it runs into other problems that physicalism doesn't have. Constitutive panpsychism is the idea that consciousness is not emergent. It is not an epiphenomenon. It's not something that unconscious matter somehow magically creates. It is something fundamental in matter. So matter at its elementary level, so elementary subatomic particles like electrons, quarks, and so on, next to having physical properties like electric charge, spin, mass, these elementary subatomic particles also have fundamental phenomenal properties. In other words, qualitative experience. So constitutive panpsychism says that experience is just one more of the fundamental properties of matter, and therefore inherent in all elementary subatomic particles of a given type, if not in all elementary subatomic particles, period. So an electron has its own little micro consciousness. It is a little micro subject with a conscious inner life of its own. And that conscious inner life is not reducible. You cannot explain it in terms of anything else. It is just a fundamental property of the electron. It's a given of nature, according to constitutive panpsychists. I will from now on just use the word panpsychism and panpsychists instead of qualifying it with constitutive, but I will be meaning every single time constitutive panpsychism unless I explicitly say otherwise. So you could summarize panpsychism as the statement that all matter is conscious. Now, does it avoid the hard problem? Yes, in that it does not require an explanation for consciousness. It does not require reducing consciousness to something else that is not consciousness. And that's the heart of the hard problem. But is this a valid way of circumventing the hard problem? I would say it isn't, because it's not really explaining anything. It's just adding one more thing to our reduction base. Now, a reduction base in philosophy are those fundamental building blocks of nature in terms of which we can explain everything else, but which themselves have no explanation.
No, it's not what we can explain. It's not that, okay, now I have a reduction base, and now I can explain this, that, and the other. No, it's the building blocks of what you use to explain things with. It doesn't mean that you necessarily will be arriving at an explanation, but it's the only tool you have to base your explanations on, right? Just because you have a reduction base doesn't mean that you necessarily can explain everything, right? But the reduction base is the bare bone limitations that you should always be able to reduce your claims back to, right? If you can reduce some kind of philosophy back to the reduction base, there's something wrong with that philosophy.
We just say, well, nature is like this, period. And that is unavoidable, because you cannot have a theory of nature that keeps forever on explaining one thing in terms of something else. At some point, you either go circular or you hit rock bottom. And then this final thing, which itself...
This is a very, very, very important thing, in my opinion. And if you do not get your metaphysics right, you will never get to a decent kind of reduction base. I would actually say that one of the most, if not the most important aspect of metaphysics is establishing your reduction base, because that is what you're going to be able to, it's the only thing that you will be able to check whether or not your, far-reaching philosophy is valid or not. You will have to be able to, okay, if I make this this is how it is, should be able to reduce it back to the reduction base. Otherwise, it's not good philosophy. There has to be some anchor point in your philosophy. You can't just throw around words left and right. Yeah, if people believe them and they fit with their agenda and, subjective ideas of what they actually want to be good philosophy, okay, you can maybe convince them and get them on your side or something like that, but that doesn't mean it's good philosophy just because you have 50,000 listeners on your channel or whatever, right? It doesn't make it good just because it's popular. And the way you understand whether or not a philosophy is good is, what is your reduction base? If the reduction base is not anchored to something that people can check, and I can check, and you can check, and everybody can check, it's not good philosophy. It should be rejected as bad philosophy, in my opinion, right?
Has no explanation, but in terms of which we can explain lots of other things, that is called an element in our reduction base. Reduction in philosophy is a technical word for explanation. So to reduce something is to explain it in terms of something else. And
yeah, it's like if you say, I talk about car, for instance, okay, and you ask me, what is a car? Well, a car is an object that is made of wheels and a box and a motor, right? Okay, then you say, okay, but what's a wheel? Well, a wheel is sort of a piece of metal with rubber around it, right? And air inside. But what is rubber? Well, rubber is, and you can keep going and keep going and keep going with this kind of reduction until you get to some reduction base where you can't go any further, right? Identifying that reduction base is of absolute importance in philosophy. If you do not have that reduction base, there's no philosophy, right? Because otherwise you should see all kinds of arguments about how to understand experience or your mind or consciousness, which is what you're thinking about when you're doing philosophy, right? Where do all these clarifications about what I know, what kind of insights and why I do this and why I do that, where do they come from? Is it because mommy told me, or is it something that I have actually philosophized through myself? And so what am I basing it on? Well, that would actually be your reduction base, right? And if that's not settled in your philosophy, there is no philosophy. There might be philosophy, but what you're presenting without a reduction base should be rejected, in my opinion, right? If there's no reduction base that is clearly stated from this philosopher, you can't take it seriously, right? Because it possibly, very likely, it's just, I like this, it sounds great, I feel it's good to present this kind of philosophy, but I'm not basing it on anything then that you, the listener of my philosophy, can actually go and check whether or not there's some oomph to it, right? So if there's a reduction base, it's a reduction base that you can tell people about, and they can say, yes, I can go check by myself, right? And if you can't go check by yourself, you're into mysticism, right? It's a kind of mysticism where if you don't have a reduction base that everybody can go and use, right? So,
reduction base contains those something else's in terms of which you explain the rest of nature. Now, a good theory of nature is one that has very few elements in your reduction base. That's the one that has the most explanatory power. You explain everything in terms of...
Really, why is that necessarily the case? I'm saying you shouldn't use, it's like Occam's razor. If you have two competing theories that explain the same thing, the one with a few steps and fewest, axioms and whatever is preferable, but it doesn't mean that it's the right one. If you can't decide on any other parameter about these two explanations, go with the simplest one, right? That's sort of an intuitive. It's not a sort of full-fledged, law of the universe, but it sounds like it's possibly closer to the right one. If there's two competing and one is cumbersome and one is simple, or simpler, it's possibly the simple one, right? But it doesn't necessarily follow. It could possibly potentially be the complicated one that was right. The simple one just overlooked something. You can't know that, right? So be careful by just you're reducing into maybe some kind of abstraction rather than a useful or usable reduction base. This is a very big problem, and I would argue that Bernardo Kastrup later falls for this trap of going beyond the actual reduction base you should be following, in my opinion, because he wants to go to there's only one thing, right?
Of very few things. And the best theories of nature are those that have only one thing in the reduction.
Why? Why is that the best? Who are you to tell what's the best, right? If you need three things to explain something, you shouldn't go try to find one thing explaining it. If you need three things to explain it, right? You shouldn't reject the I mean, it's not necessary. You can oversimplify your reduction base into something that is sort of, too simple, right? It's this fetish about I have to go down to sort of, superstrings or something like that, right? There's one kind of thing that can describe everything. It's like it will make things simple. I understand that. But just because you want it to be simple doesn't mean it's necessarily that simple or as simple as you want it to be, right? Just be careful about this reduction base.
Only one irreducible fundamental element of nature in terms of which you can explain everything else. So what does panpsychism do? It simply adds another element to the reduction base, namely consciousness, mind. It doesn't explain mind, it just labels it as something that we don't need to explain. I think this is more of a cop-out than an explanation. I don't think this is a satisfying way out of the hard problem of consciousness. But anyway, this is what panpsychists do, and then after having postulated that elementary subatomic particles are microsubjects, they then postulate that these microsubjects combine with one another in some way that is not clearly specified to form the macro subject that we are. We have seemingly unitary inner life. I don't experience myself as gazillions of little subjects talking to each other. I experience myself as one subject with one integrated mind. So if my mind is formed...
Well, I'm cutting into his explanation here, right? But, I'm also having a very hard time with panpsychism. It's basically an attempt, rather than saying there's all this sort of matter out here, and my mind or my brain is made of matter, and somehow consciousness emerges, whatever term, right, from this matter, and is completely different from how we describe that matter, right? We're describing it using, formulas and measurements and all sorts of, parameters and constants and whatever, right? The gas constant, the Avogadro's number, whatever, all these kind of, but there's nothing in those description of this matter that must lead to the color green, for instance, right? Or this smell of coffee. The smell of coffee is sort of in a completely different paradigm than all this, the standard model or whatever you want to, explain that outside world with. So how does that outside world, the brain, for instance, right? How does that in any shape or form become this experience, right? And that's where the idealist will come and say, well, you have never had anything but the experience, right? But that's another story we are going into later here, right? But that what they are trying to do then, they are saying, okay, maybe this consciousness thing is actually also a kind of matter, you could say, right? Maybe that's my interpretation. It's a special kind of matter. But because we are sort of, it emerges, it sort of coalesces. The more matter you have, and a particular kind of matter, maybe higher level, forms of molecules and DNA and proteins and big Daltons of molecule, they're sort of more consciousness lumped together, and this consciousness apparently sort of lumps together in the mind up here, right? So it's like, I understand it's a sort of, it feels like sophistry to me, right? It feels so much like sophistry, right? It's like, it's sort of an argument completely out of the left field that is, turning your thinking on its head. How do I approach this? How do I go against this argument of panpsychism? And that's actually what gives it some momentum, is that those who are idealists, or even materialists for that matter, were having a hard time arguing against it. But the problem is not that it's hard to argue against. The problem is, in my opinion, and that's what I see Bernardo Kastrup doing, is it's actually incredibly hard to argue for, because you do not have anything to go with, right? It's like, I have an idea of what happens in that area that the idealist would say you have no access to, and then it ends up becoming what I already experience. So as he says, Bernardo Kastrup, rightfully in my opinion, it doesn't explain anything. It's just another story about what's going on beyond your experience that eventually becomes your experience, right? So it seems like it's an attempt to bridge the gap between consciousness and matter, or the mind, body, whatever, right? The hard problem of consciousness, in order to say, well, it doesn't emerge from the matter. It was already there, but because of the way matter, interacts and all the laws and all, this consciousness lumps itself together in your mind, and then that's what you're using to understand the matter with, sort of, right? But it's sort of, you can see that it becomes absolutely very difficult to argue for anything, because it's all fabulations about something you cannot possibly have an empirical insight into, right? It's pure mental circle jerk, right? So it's sort of, it's a weird kind of, I'm not even sure what kind of label I should put on it, but I think that what seems appealing to some people is that it's hard to argue against, and that's the sort of, then they can sort of get into it, because they can sort of reject people because they can't argue very well against it, right? Other than saying, well, you are fabulating about something you cannot possibly have any access to, so it doesn't matter, this argumentation, right? So, yeah, those are just my thoughts, right?
Formed somehow out of the little micro consciousnesses of the elementary subatomic particles inside my head, then these micro consciousnesses or these micro subjects somehow have to combine to form my consciousness, my unitary macro mind. And that's exactly what panpsychists postulate, but in a more or less hand-waving way. They don't say how that combination actually happens, and they don't produce an undeniable empirical evidence that such combination actually happens in nature. Because, even if you can't explain something explicitly and conceptually all the way, if you can say, well, although I can't really make total sense of it, look, it happens in nature. If you can do that, then that's better than an explanation, because the explanation is supposed to highlight the plausibility that something actually happens. But if you can show it happening, that's stronger than the explanation. But yeah, panpsychists cannot point out a concrete, unambiguous example in nature in which combination happens. They might say, well, but the fact that we are conscious subjects at a macro level proves that combination happens. Well, that begs the question, of course. There is only evidence for combination if you, to begin, assume that combination happens. So what I mean by empirical evidence is not one that begs the question, is not one that assumes your hypothesis in the interpretation of the evidence, but one that is objective and unambiguous. And you say, look, this is actually happening. There is no other way to make sense of these empirical facts other than combination. So according to panpsychists, we are sort of emergent subjects. Our consciousness is not fundamental. We are actually made up of gazillions of little micro consciousnesses, each one attached to one of the elementary particles that make up our brain. So in a sense, and that's why I put this picture here.
There's one thing that it's like if they can bridge the gap between if they can use panpsychism to eliminate the hard problem of consciousness, they can stay with materialism or physicalism, right? That's the attempt. If you can somehow argue in a way that people give up and say, okay, I guess you have solved the hard problem of consciousness, then they can stay with the materialism, because that's actually what they want. They want to circumvent idealism by using panpsychism to validate or say that materialism is validated by this attempt at refuting the hard problem of consciousness. So they can stick with the materialism, right? It doesn't explain anything. You're still left with your experience. However, it formed by panpsychism or whatever, where this consciousness or experience and awareness of experience comes from. You're still left with that experience, right? And that's what metaphysics does. This is not interesting in metaphysics, whether or not it formed this, that, or the other way. It's still fabulations. It is fabulations about what happened before you had the freaking experience. It doesn't matter, right? And matter is maybe not the best word to use in this sense, but it has no bearing on your experience. You can't explain how to go about interpreting your experience by trying to explain how it evolved or where it came from or how it came to be. Because that's fabulations about something you do not have access to, right? So it's kind of bullshit. It's a misleading kind of metaphysics that goes around what is actually essential in metaphysics is, what the hell do I do with this experience? How do I understand it? That's what we want to get to, or that's what I want to get to, and I want to encourage people to think of it that way. The 4 F's, right? Fighting, fleeing, fogging, and feeding. What the hell do I do with my experience? If I experience, Bernardo Kastrup, what the hell do I do with it, right? That's what's interesting. Not whether or not there were little consciousnesses that, coalesced into a bigger consciousness that became my consciousness. That doesn't help me solve whether or not I should eat that freaking tree, right? Okay.
This is erosion on a rock that looks like a face with a nose, with two eyes here, big screaming mouth. And what I'm trying to sort of evoke in you is this notion that panpsychism is related to, old-fashioned animism, the idea that inanimate objects are conscious in some way. And if you consider an elementary subatomic particle an inanimate object, then panpsychism relates to animism in some ways, not all the way, but in some sense. All right, so let's start looking at the problems. I already mentioned one, which is, panpsychism doesn't really explain anything. It just throws something else into the reduction base in an attempt to avoid an explanation altogether. So I find this not satisfying at all. But independent and next to that, there are three other major problems. One of them is, and I alluded to already, there is no explicit, coherent way to make sense of this notion that micro-subjects...
No, but what he's going into here seems to be that the flaw or the bad thinking that most of these metaphysicians, I don't even know that if that's a word, they do is they fabulate about what is beyond experience or what happens before it becomes an experience, and then they go and analyze their experience in order to figure out what happens before experience. It's fucking stupid, right? It makes it even worse. Okay. What happens beyond your experience? Well, hang on a second. I'm going to analyze my experience. No. You can't do that, right? You're talking about what happens before experience, right? So that's why it's a mental circle jerk. It's a mental masturbation of some kind, right? It's not your experience is it's the final step before that which you try to explain, right? So you can't go and look at that experience in order to figure out what happens before it becomes an experience, right? So he's going to explain sort of with bones that has a distance, and there can't be mind between particles, and these are all experiences and even abstractions of experiences. This is even worse, right? Abstractions is not empirical. These are extracted somehow from your experiences or your qualia, right? So it's just be careful, because it's just inherent in most every. When you listen to Donald Hoffman, when you didn't listen to Bernardo Kastrup, when you listen to like Philip Goff, panpsychism and illusionists, they all use their experience to explain what is beyond experience. It's fucking ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous.
Somehow can combine in such a way that their micro fields of experience combine into a higher level, emergent, but unitary field of combined experience. The force of constitutive panpsychism is in trying to account for the formation of our consciousness in terms of micro consciousnesses, in the same way that chemistry, for instance, accounts for the properties of substances or molecules in terms of its constitutive elements, like atoms. But this doesn't work for panpsychism. There has been a paper in 2014, which I will list below in the description of this video, which shows that this is incoherent. For instance, if you have two electrons in your brain, and one of them fundamentally sees red or experiences redness, and the other one fundamentally experiences blueness. The idea of panpsychism would be that if they combine, then the combination experiences purpleness, a combination of blue and red. But this isn't coherent. You can't compare that to chemistry, because when two atoms combine to form a molecule, yes, new properties emerge, but the atoms themselves, other than sharing some electrons on the outer orbitals, they remain what they are. The atoms are there, present in the molecule. But if we say that an electron that sees redness and another electron that experiences blueness combine, and then the result experiences purpleness, then where is the redness? Where is the blueness? They sort of disappear. They are subsumed into this purpleness, and there is no explicit and coherent mechanism to account for that. So not only is it not comparable to how chemical properties emerge through chemical combinations, like covalent combinations. So not only that, not only is this analogy not legitimate, there is no coherent account for how this stuff happens. You see, we might be tempted to say that if you're a panpsychist,
one way to elaborate on what I said before is that when people metaphysically or explain metaphysics by using their experience to explain what is beyond the experience or what becomes that experience, which you do not have access to, well, then they always use some kind of abstraction from their experience and say that abstraction is out there, and then that becomes the experience. It's the same violation, the circular argument structure that is in this, right? Panpsychists use, say, elementary particles. Where did they get the idea of elementary particles? From their experience. So they are taking again the map and creating a territory out of it, to stay with Bernardo Kastrup's explanation. It's the same old shitty violation of the inherent structure in what you're trying to explain. You're using that structure and then you're violating this structure in order to explain the structure. It's the same problem that there's always there when people do metaphysics, right?
That the consciousnesses of different electrons combine if the electrons sort of go into the same orbit, or if they combine in some way, if they're physically close or touch in a colloquial way, or a colloquial sense of touch. The problem is, even at a fairly high level, almost microscopic level, neurons don't touch each other. I don't mean by this that there is a vacuum between neurons, of course not. Somebody once criticized me by saying, there is actually something in between the neurons. That's not what I mean. What I mean is the parts that you identify as one neuron and the parts you identify as another neuron, they don't touch each other. There is something else in between them, which we call a synaptic cleft. And that's what I illustrate here. So this is the synapse.
So Bernardo Kastrup is using his abstractions of his experience in order to explain what is beyond experience. So it's so crazy now that the panpsychist is violating the explanatory power of their experience, attempting to explain what becomes experience by using aspects of your experience. Now Bernardo Kastrup is using abstractions from his experience in order to refute an invalid abstraction from your experience. You see, it's like, oh my God, right? Oh.
The extreme of one neuron, and this is the neuron body of another neuron. So this is the tip of a dendrite of one neuron, and this is the body of another neuron. The synaptic cleft is this.
Nobody says that because you have an experience, an abstraction, which you has presented here as sort of what is going on in synapses and whatever it is, this thing, right? That's how it is on the other side of your experience. In fact, you have recently said in this series that you expect, even if you have no access to what is out there, the only thing you're going to say it's vastly different. Even the term difference is not sufficient in order to illuminate how different it is from your experience. So how can you go about using abstractions of experiences in order to either explain or refute explanations about what's going on beyond the experience? I don't understand why philosophers can't see the inherent stupidity in this kind of argumentation. He's actually using the same fallacious way of arguing in order to refute the same kind of argument. I don't get it, man. Oh. It just goes to show that what you can only use in philosophy is your experience, right? And that's why that reduction base of your experience is so incredibly important, right? Otherwise, you will jump into all sorts of abstraction and saying this is an abstraction, and I'm supposing this is going on beyond my experience. Oh, I actually forgot that I'm actually arguing about my experiencing, but sort of transposing it into that area which I do not have access to. It's like you're losing contact with what you are doing, in my understanding, right?
Space here.
And this is where you're going to lose people, because they're so confused at this point. You are not going to be able to illuminate anyone about this, right? Because you're actually violating your own axioms, unstated implicit axioms, I might add, right? But axioms nevertheless.
In between. And neurons communicate by releasing neurotransmitters, which are originally encapsulated in these little sacs inside the neuron. These sacs come to the edge, and then they open up. And these neurotransmitters are then released in the synaptic cleft, and they physically drift towards these receptors here on the other neuron. So when they attach into the receptors...
What he's actually saying in this exam is that I have an extract... I have heard from some third party who had an abstraction from their empirical experience, which they present in this drawing. But this is an abstraction of an experience. Now I'm going to use some third-party abstraction from an experience to explain what lies behind that empirical observation that third-party person had that created this kind of abstraction. You see how this, you have to stay on the experiential side of things, right? And you have to stay with the experience, the qualia, because that's what you have. You do not have the abstractions. You might be the only one in the universe having that particular abstraction, right? But the qualia from an axiomatic point is what I will say, this is what you can have as a reduction base. You can have the 5 sense qualia, right? That's what you can have. The rest is purely abstraction and fabulations and using an abstraction from qualia as an explanation for why qualia becomes qualia or doesn't become qualia is ridiculous, man, right?
Then if enough of this happens, then there is an electrochemical charge communicated between the neurons. So neurons don't even touch. So how are we to account for this notion that the combined consciousness of one neuron combines at a yet higher level with the consciousness of another neuron, if they aren't even touching, if there is just some molecules drifting between the space, in the space between them. And if these were possible, then why doesn't my consciousness combine with my girlfriend's consciousness if we touch each other, if we make love? I mean, we would then be very close, but our consciousnesses don't seem to combine. So this is...
Unless she's a cam girl, you might be let's not get into that.
One of the problems in panpsychism. There are technical papers, which I will list below again, which argue that this problem is as insoluble. It's called the combination problem. It's as insoluble as the hard problem itself. I wouldn't go quite that far. I think that it's comparable. I think the hard problem is really in your face, the incoherence of that. It shows the incoherence of physicalism. This one is not that bad, but it is not a problem that can be solved. Now, the second problem of panpsychism is a problem of simple logic, simple reasoning. I think the reasoning behind panpsychism is equivocated. It's wrong, and let me be explicit about where it goes wrong. And it's in the first statement of this slide here. That's where it goes wrong. It assumes or it attributes to the perceiver, the subject of perception, a structure that is discernible only in that which is perceived, in the object of perception. And there is no reason for you to import the structure of what is the structure of what's perceived to the subject of perception itself. There is simply no logical requirement for you to make that move. So let me explain to you why this is so, where they are doing this. The world we perceive can be divided down into ever smaller building blocks until we get to fundamental subatomic particles. Arguably, we can go further down to fields.
Okay, I would say that's a fallacy, right? Because these are all abstractions. These are all models. These are, these are figments of your imaginations. These are geometric. Nobody has seen the quantum realm, right? It's all measurements and, deductions of some kind, and this model seems to be functional. Let's test whether or not this model holds and so on. And then if the model can't be refuted, then we are going with this model. But that doesn't mean you have experienced that quantum realm just because you have a model of it, right? So, and you are not reducing anything. You haven't been doing any reduction. You have just created something, or saying, this, if I use this as a reduction base, I can't refute it. But because you can't, science works from continued attempts at refuting your models. If you haven't been refuted yet, doesn't mean that it's necessarily must be correct, but it hasn't been refuted. These subatomic particles are all attempts at creating models that will then take over a function as a reduction base. But they are abstractions because they are models, right? That haven't been refuted. They are not empirical, right? So they can't be a metaphysical, philosophical reduction base because you can't experience them. They are models. Come on, man.
Talk about it soon. But let's stop here for now. You can divide the world that we see on the screen of perception, on the dashboard of dials, down to elementary subatomic particles. That is then the structure of the perceived world. And then the panpsychist reasons that since we are part of the world, and since when we look at ourselves or at other people, we also know that we can divide the body of a person down to elementary subatomic particles, then the panpsychist says, therefore the subject must also be dividable down to micro-subjectivities.
Now, I don't give a flying F about panpsychism because it doesn't help me with what actually interesting about metaphysics. It attempts to explain why I have, maybe it doesn't even attempt to explain that. It's merely a half-baked attempt at refuting the hard or you removing the hard problem of consciousness in order to not invalidate materialism, right? So it's like, I don't give a shit about something that I can't experience, right? I can't experience panpsychism. I can't experience what goes on before it becomes consciousness. And the fallacy they're using is, they are using something, they have prior experiences of abstractions from experiences as an explanation of what goes on before experience. Exactly that which they didn't have when they made that abstraction from that experience prior. So they are violating delineations between experiences now, prior experiences, abstractions from those prior experiences into an explanation of what goes on before this particular experience, right? It doesn't work. It's just, mental masturbation in some way or another, right? To be a little, it's just throwing around words, right? It doesn't help me figuring out what the hell should I do with that elephant over there, right? It doesn't help me in any shape or form, right? with anything I have any interest in figuring out in my everyday. Because that's the end point of philosophy is, what the hell am I going to do with the elephant, right?
Consciousnesses, which are equivalent or which are mapped one-to-one to the elementary subatomic particles. Well, no, that is wrong. Let me give you an example. Suppose you are seeing a person on your computer screen. Now, computer screens today have such a high resolution that you don't see the pixels. But if you were to zoom in into the face of a person as it's displayed on your computer screen, you would see that it's pixelated. It's made up of little rectangles or squares, each with a different color. And you don't see them if you look from a distance, because then you don't have enough visual resolution to discern the pixels. But the image of a person on your computer screen is made up of little blocks that we call pixels. Does that mean that the person...
Pixels or pixels? Pixels? Okay, I'm sorry.
herself is made of little squares? Of course not. The pixelation is an artifact of the representation of the person. It's an artifact of how the person is perceived by you. It is not the structure of the person. The person's body is not made of little squares. It's not made of pixels. And that's the error the panpsychist makes. It attributes the pixelation of the screen of perception, the pixelation of the dashboard of dials, to the perceiver.
I'm not sure if what is trying to go at is actually the argument I just made before, that they are mixing up using abstractions from your experience or prior experiences to place beyond your experience and say, these things I had a prior experience abstraction of is what eventually becomes my experience, right? They are just not, aware of the circularity of their argumentation. I think that's what it's trying to say, but I'm not actually sure about this here, right? I have a sense that I don't understand what it's trying to say here.
Subject of perception. Now, this is as arbitrary, and arbitrary also in exactly the same way.
I don't understand, but I don't. What is pixelated? What's that experience or abstraction of an experience he's referring to, which is pixelated? I'm not experiencing anything pixelated except on a computer screen, but that is some kind of manipulation of stuff in order to create pixels. That's not a reality as such, right? Not the referred inherent objectification. If that's a girl on that picture, I know that that's not a girl, but it's an artificial picture of a girl, right? Even if it references the same concept. I'm not sure I understand this.
As it is arbitrary to say that you are made of little squares simply because that's how you are represented to me when I see you through my screen, in a Zoom call or in a Skype call, whatever. It is exactly the same error. It's this arbitrary carrying over of the structure of one thing to the structure of another, for which there is absolutely no logical reason. So the very logical motivation for panpsychism, the notion that because our bodies, as displayed on the screen of perception, because that's what a body is a representation on the dashboard of dials that we talk.
It's sort of alarming to me how little he talks about that experience, which he just claimed in the previous chapters is the only thing you have, right? You have an experience. You might claim that it's based on something outside, and you can axiomatically say, okay, the experience is some kind of, let's say, reflection of an outside. I cannot tell you how and why it becomes, but the experience I have cannot be an outside itself because it must be inside my mind and all this, right? Which we have gone into before here. So why is he not talking about the experience? Why is he trying to... Why? It's like, why are you spending time on people who don't understand it correctly or have misinterpreted this or doing bad metaphysics or whatever but why do you need to talk about all those people who does it the wrong way? in order to start talking about the right way, which is your way, apparently, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't present it. Why don't you just present your idea? Why do you care so much about those who do it the wrong way, right? If I wanted to explain bicycles, I wouldn't start talking about, all those who are made, bicycles with half a wheel or upside down bicycles, whatever, right? I would just explain how a bicycle is and how it functions, right? Why would I spend time on those who misunderstands it? Now, that's a kind of a sophist trick, right? That's also what politicians do. They say, look at that idiot, or that argument he says is so bad, and therefore implicitly my argument is better, right? By saying those are stupid, my argument must be better. And if you can sort of make people think that there are no other alternatives, they're going to eat your argument without you even doing the rigid argumentation for why it must be valid, right? So it's like using somebody who's bad at football, let's say, in order to tell people how good you are at football, right? It's sort of comparing yourself with, it's like Mike Tyson fighting a Boy Scout and saying, well, I'm great at boxing, right? Not a good argument, in my opinion, right? This is not good philosophy to talk about, they do it wrongly, and they do it wrongly, and they do it wrongly, and let me present my argument, right? It's sort of grooming your listener into rejecting the others before they sort of get the right version, which is yours, right? A good neutral philosopher should say, this is my philosophy, right? This is good philosophy. I don't need to illuminate you about good philosophy by starting out spending a couple of hours explaining bad philosophy, right? So that's just something that is sort of rubs me the wrong way in this, right?
Talked about in part one. A body is something that is perceived. There is no reason to think that because the body is subjected to the resolution of your dashboard of dials and therefore gets pixelated when represented there, there is no reason to think that that which is represented, that the real reality that is represented by the body on the dashboard of dials, that real reality is also...
That real reality? What the hell is that? What is it? The real reality? What is that? Is reality not real? Is there reality and then there's a real reality? And what, right? What is he talking about now, right? He's confusing me.
Pixelated. And that real reality, of course, is our conscious inner life. So there is no reason to think that our conscious inner life...
So a real reality is our experience.
Is also made up of a combination of gazillions of little subjectivities, simply because our bodies are
little subjectivities. I like that. Made up of little subjectivities. That sounds funny. Yeah, basically that's what they're claiming, but they have no way of getting there, and if they're going to argue and presenting some kind of empirical observations that are going to explain what comes before empirical observation, there you got them, right? Because they are staying on the other side of that experience in order to explain the experience. It's ridiculous, right?
When displayed on the screen of perception, on the dashboard. In other words, simply because our bodies are made of elementary subatomic particles. So I've repeated this several times now in the hope that repetition helps drive the message. I will repeat it one final time. Okay. The fact that our bodies are made up of elementary subatomic particles tells us simply of the resolution limits of our dashboard of dials, of the screen of perception. The elementary subatomic particles that make up our body are the pixels of our internal dashboard, of the screen of perception. It's an artifact of the screen that represents the world, not an artifact of the world as it is in and of itself. In other
If I'm experiencing elephant, right, do I care whether or not some elementary particles and some consciousness particles and whatever eventually made me experience elephant? Does that help me in any way figuring out what the fuck I should do with that elephant? No, it doesn't. And that's why this discussion about panpsychism and what goes on beyond experience is so ridiculously useless, right? It's taking you away from what is important about philosophy. It is getting to some kind of understanding of your experience and what the fuck to do with it, right?
words, it is not the structure of the subject that gets represented on the dashboard of dials as a body, as a biological, living, metabolizing body. Making this error is entirely equivalent to saying that a person is made up of little squares just because that's how the person is represented on the screen. All right, that was the second problem. The third problem, and I think any one of the previous problems alone is already reason enough for us to completely discard constitutive panpsychism as a completely unhelpful hypothesis, positive only in the way that it reflects an acceptance of the hard problem, not only as a problem, but as a sort of internal logical inconsistency in physicalism. But having said that, the third problem is even worse for panpsychism because it shows that constitutive panpsychism is physically incoherent. It embodies a fundamental misunderstanding of what we know from foundations of physics since at least the 1950s.
Now he's using the term know, right, within metaphysics. That is a very bad sign. Now, you can use various terms sort of to your liking to describe things, but there are a few terms that I really, really don't like being used in metaphysics, and that is knowledge and that is truth, right? Truth and knowledge are terms that shouldn't be used anywhere near metaphysics, right? Because metaphysics needs to be established before you do epistemology. And all things considered, knowledge and truth is a part of epistemology, right? So you can't state that an abstraction or a model, which is a kind of artificial abstraction, that is supposed to explain subatomic particles or quantum particles that haven't been refuted yet by empirical observation, right? As some kind of truth in metaphysics. I mean, what the hell are you doing, man, right? You're confusing all these, man. Maybe you should do some epistemology and maybe even ethics, but at least epistemology and get to some kind of understanding of knowledge, truth, and objectivity before you start to use these terms in metaphysics, right? But you're staying in this pet subject called metaphysics. You're not venturing into trying to establish knowledge or even further establish some kind of morality and ethics or an idea of virtue and whatever, right? Maybe you should do that in order to figure out whether or not all these, mental masturbations about metaphysics actually work towards an end, which is, what the fuck do I do with that elephant, right? Or what don't I do, maybe, right?
And the problem is the following. The way panpsychism explains why my mind seems to be separate from yours, after all, I can't read your thoughts or see the world from your perspective, and presumably neither can you see the world from my perspective or read my thoughts. So our minds are separated. And the way panpsychism accounts for it is to say that the elementary subjectivities, the gazillions of little subjects that constitute my brain, they combine only inside my brain because they are spatially close to each other, so to say. So they can physically combine. But they don't combine with the subjectivities that form your brain because my brain is spatially separate from yours. So it is this...
Well, spatially separate is an abstraction from an experience. You can't use that as an explanation of what goes on before that experience. Exactly, also because, as Bernardo Kastrup says, that is a completely different paradigm. It's not only a different thing. I mean, experience of a different paradigm is it's a sort of a double whammy, right? It's both an experience of it and it's a different paradigm, right? It's twice as removed from what it is in itself, right? So there's nothing at all about your experience or even your abstractions with this is another layer, is even a yet another paradigm removed from the thing itself that you can use in any way, or shape, or form to fabulate about that which you do not have access to. Stay the fuck away from that which you do not have access to, man, right? How hard is it? Why are you or anybody fabulating about this area you do not have access to, right? Stop doing that. You are diverting attention away from what this fuck is important. This is your everyday qualia experience, right? What the fuck do I do with the elephant, right? I don't care whether or not your mind is distant from my mind. Who gives a flying F about it, right? I want to understand what the fuck I should do when I experience elephant, right?
Ability to distinguish things in space, to have spatial distance between two brains that allows panpsychists to tentatively account for the fact that I can't read your thoughts or see the world from your perspective, and neither the other way around, because our brains are physically separate. Right. But that is based on the assumption that elementary subatomic particles are like little bodies, corpuscles, with well-delineated spatial boundaries, which is the way, colloquially, most non-specialists visualize.
Oh, I get it. Yeah. So there's this idea that the model of is sort of the old school model, a little particle, a proton here and a neutron there and an electron there, like little, solar systems orbiting, whatever. And that's not really how, in the last 50 years or so, it has been more like it's about how likely is it that particle is there, right? So there are certain places that it's more likely that the electron is than in another place, and so on, right? There are sort of, I'm not particular into this kind of thing. I don't understand it very well, but it's sort of more about likelihood than knowledge. That is sort of, it's not either or. It's like, well, how likely is it, right? Because it's sort of like a swarm of it's more like an area of X rather than this little ball of an electron, right? It's a functional model, but that's what I pointed out before. These are just mental models that haven't been refuted yet. Maybe those little balls, as he says, the mini solar systems of atoms has been refuted because it can't be that. It's more like a likelihood that things are in a particular place. But it's still a model. It's not something that is experiential, and it's beyond human experience. And in the end, it's the experience I have, or maybe you could say also the conceptualizations or the objectifications, like elephant. That is what I have to go with in my everyday. I don't really care about these elementary particles. I don't give a shit, right? When I go down to the grocery stores, I'm not looking for particular particles, right? I'm looking for apples and potatoes, ice cream and elephants and bicycles and whatever, right? I don't care about elementary particles, right? I don't care about the second law of thermodynamics, right? And gravity hasn't changed since Einstein, created a more precise description of gravity. It's still, the apple still falls on the head of Newton. When I eat a sandwich, it always lands with the wrong side down on the floor when I drop it. So it falls at the same speed as it always done, I believe, right? So that's not my everyday. Don't stay in these clouds of mental masturbation. Get down to fucking reality, where you are in your everyday, right? What do I do with that elephant? That's the end goal of my philosophy.
Elementary subatomic particles, because the name particles seems to evoke in our visualization the idea of a little grain of sand or a little ball, something small but with defined spatial boundaries. So that assumption is fundamental to panpsychism, because if elementary subatomic particles do not have these well-defined discrete spatial boundaries, then panpsychism cannot explain.
I don't know why. I understand, and it's also it's a decent point he is making here. But why is he not using this screen of perception as the borderline between are you talking about that which comes before the experience, or are you talking about the experience and potential abstractions from that experience on the other side, on the me side, right? You can always say, if people try to explain that which is before experience, what are you using to explain that? You can't use the experience to explain it, because that is what you have to explain it before it becomes the experience. So you can't use the experience to explain what is before the experience. That's the cross, that's the hammer you're using. You're saying, I can't use it. Don't use your experience or abstractions from it in order to explain what comes before the experience. It's a circular, begging the question kind of argument. It is lazy and stupid and incredible that, well-trained academic philosophers do not see this, right? It takes some, freelance philosopher like me to point it out to them. It's incredible.
Why my mind is separate from yours. Right. Is this then so that elementary subatomic particles are indeed these little bodies with defined discrete spatial boundaries? No, that's not what we know from physics. That we visualize the elementary subatomic particles that way is just a metaphor. It helps us think about it. In reality, we know that what's going on is that for each type of elementary subatomic particle, and there are 17 types last time I looked at the standard model, for each type of elementary subatomic particles, there corresponds a field, a quantum field, which has no spatial boundaries. So all these 17 quantum fields span the entire universe without spatial boundaries.
I guess it's a good argument that if you're using elementary particles and adding consciousness to that, you can't just violate what the science you're using is telling you about these so-called particles. They are fields rather than, little balls. So it's like shooting your own foot. You're saying, I'm using that science. And then that science tells you, but you can't use it this way. Then the panpsychist will say, okay, my so-called metaphysics doesn't work, right? And it's actually not really metaphysics. It's sort of that mental masturbation of what goes beyond experience, which is a no-go area, philosophically, in my opinion, other than saying, I'm going with the axiom that there's something beyond my experience, and I can't go and fabulate about it because it's beyond my experience. Exactly because it's beyond my experience. Everything I am thinking or goes on in my mind is something that is either the experience or an awareness or a derivative from that experience. Right? These can never be used to explain what is before that experience. I mean, it's so obvious to me, right?
And what we call particles are just patterns of excitation on this field. Now, let me explain this with a metaphor. Suppose you have a lake with a very calm surface, not disturbed at all, like a mirror surface on the lake. And then there comes the wind, or you throw a pebble in the lake and you create ripples, like here. You create a ripple here, there's another ripple there. So you create several ripples. Now, these ripples have well-identified physical properties. You can point at where they are. You can say, here is the peak of a ripple. That's where the ripple is. A moment later, the ripple will be a little bit further away, and you can still point at it, and you say, there is the ripple. The ripple will have a certain height, will have a certain direction of movement, will have a certain speed of movement, will have a certain width. There are lots of physical properties that you can attach accurately to the ripple. And again, you can point at the ripple and say, there is the ripple. There the ripple begins, there the ripple ends. It's going this direction with that speed, with that height. These are all physical properties that can be described with numbers. A number for speed, say centimeters per second, another number for height, say inches, and so on and so forth. Now, the same goes for a subatomic particle. We can attribute physical properties to a subatomic particle, like spin, like momentum, electric charge, mass. Just like we can attribute physical properties to the ripple, like speed, direction of movement, height, width, and so on. However, notice that...
But that elementary particle is not something you experience, right? You can't compare it to something you can experience with qualia, right? That is a representation of something you could possibly experience using your senses, so to say. But you can't experience a particle that is already an abstraction, right? So that abstraction cannot be transposed into or equated with an experience of ripples on a lake. That can be done using qualia, right? And what you abstract and what you use of measurements and all that, that's some secondary thing. The experience comes first before you even start to, attach measurements or those kinds of descriptions to it. But because you have prior kind of abstractions like circles and rings and speeds and all this, then you're going to say, maybe I can make a model called a particle and try to make measurements on it, and then use these calculations to describe it. But mind you, it's still an abstraction that is used to create a model of something you do not have access to, or that you have no empirical way of getting to, right? That's a jump, that's a comparison that is sort of hidden in there, right? That he's violating what he's actually referring to. He's starting to referring to some kind of reduction base, which is particles, which is actually not a reduction base. That is an abstraction you're using as a model to explain what is going on.
That there is nothing to the ripple but the lake in which it ripples. You cannot lift the ripple out of the lake because the ripple is the lake in movement. What we call a ripple is simply a doing of the lake. It is not a thing. It's not a noun. It's a verb. What we call a ripple...
How do I know it's a lake? What? What's a lake? Right? This could be your bathtub. Is that a lake? I don't know. So you're going into terms and understandings and preconceptions about what we're talking about, right? So it's like, just be wary or be focused on terms used, right? And how they might be misunderstood or mislabeled or twisted or manipulated even, right?
It's just shorthand for describing what the lake is doing. The way the water in the lake is moving, is being excited.
Yes, but what he made there is an abstraction. He drawed some little lines that are concentric or whatever you would say, right? That's an abstraction of what is going on. The ripple, as he calls it, is an abstraction. It's not the lake. You are abstracting that from whatever you're experiencing you call lake. It's not a part of the lake. It's a part of your abstraction, right? It's a pattern your mind recognizes for some reason. I don't know why, right? That abstraction is not in the fucking lake. It's in your mind, because that's where it is, right? The experience is in your mind, and the abstractions you make from those experiences is also in the mind, and only in your mind. It's not even in that realm outside experience which you do not have access to, because you needed to have the experience in order to get to the abstraction. Ah, man.
By the pebble you threw in or the wind. There is nothing to the ripple but the lake. Now, in exactly the same way, according to quantum field theory, or QFT, there is nothing to the elementary subatomic particle, like an electron, but the quantum field in which that electron ripples. Actually, the ripple of the quantum field is the electron. The excitation of quantum field.
No, but these are all models. These are not experiences, right? You can't say you're experiencing a field and now you're abstracting something from it. No, they are purely abstractions from the get-go. They are little models made that haven't been refuted yet, right? You're not experiencing it. They are models. You have some, that picture there is colors, right? It's basically just a slab of colors. You are interpreting it as ripples, right? But it might be something different. It might be, the asshole of a chicken that is painted blue, right? Who the hell knows? This is your abstraction. It's your abstraction. The abstraction is purely in your interpretation of your experience, your awareness of your experience, or your metaconsciousness, or whatever the term is. That abstraction is not a part of anything out there. It's purely your abstraction, right? Be careful with this.
Is what we call the electron. And that excitation has physical properties: mass, charge, momentum, and so on, just like the ripple has physical properties: speed, direction of movement, height, width, and so forth. Yet there is nothing to the electron but the quantum field. To talk of the electron as a thing, as a noun, is just a metaphor. It's analogous to the way we talk of a ripple as a thing, as a noun. But the ripple is a doing, it's a verb. It's the lake doing something. You can't remove the ripple from the lake. In the same way, you can't remove the electron from the quantum field of...
But the ripple is your interpretation, as I said. It's an abstraction you make from your experience, right? You are reifying your experience as if that ripple is in your experience. No, it isn't. It's just a slab of colors, right? And how these colors move around and so on, right? The ripple is an interpretation of it, right? I mean, it's not a part of the thing. You have your experience and then you abstract or cognize particular things in your experience. But these cognitions or abstractions, or whatever term you want to put on it, they are not a part of the experience, right? This is elementary. You need to get to this, right?
Of the electron. There is no electron. There is only the quantum field. What we call an electron is just a pattern of excitation of the quantum field. And now...
What is an excitation? That's also an abstraction of some kind, right? So all these abstractions, it seems like we are moving away from the barebone qualia into abstractions of all sorts of kinds that are juggled around in order to explain or refute other abstractions. No, you can't jump around in your abstractions. You need to get down to the reduction base and talk about that, start from that point. And whenever you jump away to the next level from that reduction base, you have to state an axiom, right? Because there's nothing to base it on other than an axiom, right? So it's sort of a, I don't know, polemic kind of philosophy rather than pure grounded philosophy, this.
Now, the important point. The quantum field has no spatial boundaries. Therefore, If the panpsychist wants to attribute consciousness as a fundamental property to a equally fundamental physical entity, then the panpsychist has to attribute that consciousness to the quantum field, because the quantum field is all that exists. The lake is all that exists.
A quantum field is a model. You can't say it exists if you can't experience it. It's model that is pounded with whatever particles and then on a computer screen and numbers. It's artificial. It's a model that attempts to describe something and it haven't been refuted yet, right? It's not empirical. I mean, it's
Psychists cannot attribute consciousness to the electron because the electron is just a metaphor for a pattern of excitation of the field. The only thing that exists is the field. But if the panpsychist does that...
Now he's talking about existence, right? That is, that's metaphysics, right? It is the only thing that exists. Okay, well, hang on a sec, man. You haven't defined what you mean by existence, right? You haven't defined that yet. You're also using the term no and the term true and so on. You haven't defined those yet, right? You are sort of all over the place using terms here that are not necessarily very well defined or should even be used within the area of philosophy you're attempting to grapple with here, right? So it's sort of getting more and more fluffy, this, right?
Then there would be 17 universal consciousnesses, one for each field, and the panpsychist would fail to account for the fact that I can't read your thoughts because these fields have no spatial boundaries. So the electrons in my brain are just patterns of excitation.
But basically, what a panpsychist is trying to talk about is what is beyond experience. And Bernardo Kastrup is using a model derived from abstractions of experiences in order to refute and attempt to explain what is beyond experience. It is so ridiculous at this point, right? It sounds like he is refuting something, and he might be doing that, but he's sort of the words he's using and the references to experiences, abstractions, or what is beyond experience is not cohesive. It's sort of polemic, right? So it's a bad argument or invalid argument being refuted using abstractions. It's on another level, right? It's like I'm not going into this, right?
Of the same field that permeates your brain. All 17 quantum fields will connect my brain to yours because they span the entire universe. They span through our bodies. So the panpsychist cannot account for individual consciousness if panpsychism is to be made coherent from a physical point of view. The whole idea of panpsychism is based on a fairly naive physical misunderstanding. Now, I've made this argument before, and the only vaguely tenable reply I've gotten, and that was from Philip Goff, was the point that there is an alternative formulation, an alternative theory in physics called the Broglie-Bohm theory, which sort of contradicts quantum field theory.
I think I'm heading on. I'm getting a little fed up with this.
With relativity implies.
I think most of what I wanted
what
to
it
say.
was meant to explain to begin with.
Most of what I wanted to say about panpsychism has been pointed out by Bernardo, and what I want to add to that, right? Both to panpsychism and also how Bernardo tries to argue against or refute panpsychism as any kind of explanation. Let's see here.
I think this is a killer for panpsychism. Any one of the previews already is a killer, but this is really they are meant to explain. They are meant to and neither. Okay, and what it was meant to explain to begin with. I think this is a killer for panpsychism. Any one of the previews already is a killer, but this is really definitive, I think. Okay, so where does this leave us? We've looked at mainstream physicalism, we've looked at constitutive panpsychism, and neither seems to fit the bill, neither seems to be tenable or to explain what they are meant to explain. Now, we need an alternative, and that alternative, as we will see in the next part, entails some form of spatially unbound field of subjectivity, a universal mind, if you will. But
so he's just saying using the universal mind, right? Let's read what he says here. Neither mainstream physicalism nor constitutive panpsychism are tenable. Why is it only these two, right? I thought that he said that materialism was the worst of the. So he's saying there's materialism and then panpsychism, and then the only alternative must be his kind of mind at large explanation. Are there others that he hasn't mentioned, or what are we doing here? I don't feel I'm an idealist that in any shape or form supports a notion of mind at large, or that everything is subjective. Consciousness is everywhere, also beyond your own consciousness, right? That's a bit of a trichotomy that I'm not supporting, right? So it seems like he's just jumping into, okay, I presented two that are bad, and therefore I must be good, kind of jump, right? That's not good enough for me, right? Then he says here, there obviously is a world beyond our private. Why is that obvious? No, it's not obvious, right? Is that sort of an easy step to refute solipsism or anything like that? There obviously is. Why is that obvious? It is beyond your experience, so it cannot possibly be obvious, right? You have an experience, it might be that Cartesian demon manipulating your brain in a matrix or whatever, right? You can't refute that demon just by saying it's obvious that there's no demon or something like that, right? There must be a world outside. Why is that obvious? It's absolutely not obvious to me that it is. But I am willing to state an axiom that I'm working from, that there is an outside world which my experiences are based on. But me making an axiom is certainly not a jump into it's obvious. That's a far reach, right? That's a jump that is so huge in metaphysics that it's sort of lazy just to do it this way and say it's obvious, right? What the hell, man? But that neither entails nor implies that such world is outside mind as an ontological category. So he's saying there's obviously something outside, but it's also obvious that it must be of the same kind as my experience. Well, why is that obvious? To me, it's all but obvious. He's also stated that it's another paradigm outside your experience. So it's both another paradigm we have no way of talking about, and still it's obvious that it's there, and it's also obvious that it's the same kind of ontology. So he's sort of talking himself out of the whole metaphysics, because he said it's a completely different paradigm, that our brain has no way, or our consciousness, our experience has no way of grappling with, and I would agree with that. And now he says it's the same kind of ontology. What the hell, man? We have no reason to believe that inanimate material objects are conscious. Why do we have no reason? That's just a statement. And why is he saying we? Why is he including me in that statement? I haven't agreed to that statement. So please speak about yourself. Why do you not say, I have no reason to believe that inanimate? Why are you saying we? Why are you in this collective consciousness mentality where you are sort of a spokesperson for that we? That is a dangerous notion, that you're sort of the priest of inanimate objects, right? Get the fuck out of here, man, right? but every reason to believe that they are in consciousness. This is sort of, now it just, drops this bomb on you that I'm spent a couple of hours presenting all this bad metaphysics, and therefore, doom, right? Neither material can constitute material, but obviously there's a world and we have no reason to believe, and so on. Okay, that's a claim, right? That is unfounded claims. They might not be incorrect, but they're just stated as if it's obvious. It isn't.
It's important to highlight that whatever alternative we come up with, as we will do next time, we must acknowledge that there is a world beyond.
There's nothing that we must acknowledge. Speak for yourself, right? Speak for yourself. It's your philosophy. It's not my philosophy. There is no we here, right? Please stick to your own philosophy. Say that you don't have a reason to do it, right? Don't tell me what I should have a reason to do.
Our personal, individual minds, there is a world we share.
There is a world we... What the hell is that world we share? What the hell is that? What are you talking about? All of a sudden there's a world we share, but we are dissociated from each other. We have our own subjectivities, but there's a world. But what the hell are you doing? Where did all that come from all of a sudden, right?
Even if that world is mental, it is not in my mind alone, and it's not in your mind alone. There is something out there that is not in our personal minds.
Oh, so now he's just telling you what is out there, right? He's not even going to philosophize about it. It's like, of course there's something out there, and I'm going to tell you what it is. He's not even trying to use philosophy or philosophical rigid arguments. He's just saying that it must be there, so it's there. Oh, that's what it sounds like to me, at least.
This must be acknowledged.
Oh, it must be acknowledged. So you better acknowledge it, you little peon, right? Because I'm a PhD squared. So I'm right, of course, right? That's why I've spent taxpayer money on getting this education, so I can say to you, it must be acknowledged. I'm the priest of material, of constitutive. No, I'm the priest of analytic idealism. So it has to be acknowledged.
And we have no reason, and stating the obvious here, but we have no reason to believe that individual inanimate objects like a rock.
So there's again this we, right? It's just referring to we have no reason to believe inanimate objects. Stick to your own philosophy. Don't tell me what I'm thinking, right? Don't put me in that category. Don't try to lure me in with that we term, right? In my opinion, the term we is one of the most dangerous terms you can use in any connection with anything. There is no we, right? You have your experience. You're talking to your experiences now. There's no we. There is your experience, and you're talking to your experience, making implicit axioms about what is going on in that experience, which you haven't even settled yet, because you only refuted bad metaphysics, right?
Or a telephone, or a computer, or these spectacles. We have no reason to think that they have a private conscious inner life of their own. Nothing indicates that. But we might have very good reasons to say that they are in consciousness. And this is a big difference. To say that everything is conscious is one thing. That's panpsychism. To say that everything is in consciousness is an entirely different thing. And that's what we are going to explore in part 4. We are going to look at
I need to listen to that again. Hang on a second.
An entirely difference. To say that in conscious inner life of their own, nothing indicates that. But we might have very good reasons to say that they are in consciousness. And this is a big difference. To say that everything is conscious is one thing. That's
everything
panpsychism.
is conscious.
To say that everything is in consciousness is an entirely different thing.
everything is conscious opposed to everything is in consciousness. Is this the big, trench warfare? Differences between everything is conscious and everything is in consciousness. I mean, you are talking about some kind of abstraction and then saying my philosophy is based on the differences between two different abstractions. It's ridiculous. This is never going to be anything close to anything that will be working, because I have qualia and objectifications of elephants and bicycles and people stealing my stuff or whatever, right? How are you going to get from everything is not consciousness, but everything is in consciousness, and saying this is going to be my foundation of my metaphysics, where I'm eventually going to tell you whether or not you should fuck, feed, or fight, or flee from that elephant? It doesn't work, in my opinion. It's never going to work, because the foundations, the reduction base is an abstraction, not a qualia.
And that's what we are going to explore in part 4. We are going to look...
And by the way, as you say here, it's a superior hypothesis, right? Just adding the term superior is going to, convince you, right? It's superior. And he told you already it's superior, so you don't actually have to listen. You just have to, accept it, because it's superior. Of course it's superior, because Mr. Priest of Idealism has told you it's superior, so it is superior, right? Fuck off, man.
At the thing that gives a name to this course, analytic idealism, a modern analytic...
Oh, it's modern. Oh, so it's not sort of old stuff, old dusty things that are not good. It's superior and it's modern, right? Right? Give me a break, man.
Formulation of the ontology of idealism, which postulates that underlying all nature, there is a spatially extended form of subjectivity.
A spatially extended form of subjectivity? You are fabulating about that area which you do not have access to, right? This is going to be interesting in the next part, right?
Mind, a universal mind, if you will. And then, of course, then the idealist has to face the challenge of explaining how individual minds arise within that universal mind, such that it's accounted for the fact is accounted for that I can't read your thoughts and neither can you read mine. So we are going to explore this in the next part, this hypothesis that I consider to be not only a superior hypothesis, but frankly, the only game in town today. And I don't say this out of arrogance. I say this objectively, having looked.
Objectively? Okay. Don't you need to have some idea of knowledge before you can say it's objective? You're talking about objects. Objects are cognitions from your qualia, right? That's a kind of epistemology. You haven't settled any epistemology as far as I know, right? So you cannot not talk about objectivity. Objectivity is even beyond epistemology, I would say, right? All of epistemology has to be settled before you can even fabulate about or discuss objectivity, right? So it's polemic, this.
At these issues for well over a decade now. I don't see any other way to get out of our dilemma. We will see that in the next part. Again, I recommend you don't jump straight to it. Give it a day or two.
Yes, you little people, this you can handle the truth, right? It's hard for your little brain cells, because I am PhD squared, so I'm good at this. But please don't take a bigger bite than you can chew on, little peon, right? Because you might not understand it, right? So just take a little bite at a time and make sure that you don't choke on it, because you are little people, right? I am PhD, so I can handle this, and it's superior, right? And it's the only game in town, right?
Think about what you've heard today. Think about panpsychism, what it means, what its implications are, and why it doesn't hold water, why it's not tenable, why it's not even plausible. And only then jump into part.
Yes, you should get to these conclusions that I have told you. It's not tenable, it's not plausible. These are the conclusions you need to get to because I'm the priest, right?
4. Now, part 4 will be long. It will be quite a journey. We will cover a lot of
Let me take you on a journey.
material in part 4. So try to be rested and to reserve
Okay, man.
enough time to go through it. 1 hour, 1.5 hours.
And if people don't understand it, he can always get back and say, well, that must be because you weren't rested, right? You little peons, you need to be rested. Yeah. When you get home from your night shift and you have to be rested and have some quality coffee, something to be ready for my big ass philosophy, right?
At least. And then we will face that challenge together. Till then, take care, and I'll see you soon.
Okay, it should prove interesting. Let's see what I can get out from part 4 of his talk about analytic idealism. And, well, give me a like, subscribe, and share. And check in my Discord server if you want to discuss Bernardo Kastrup. Let me hear it from you. And that will be all from here, from this part. And see you in the next one.